before I fully understood them and was fully, while I was still in the relationship, it was definitely hard to talk about.
Yeah.
Not.
Understandable.
Not
So whenever you're ready, just however, like I said, however you want to introduce yourself, and then just let the conversation go from there. I try and not say anything too much. Other than if you get stuck in the conversation or stuck where you're at, just to kind of help keep things moving. But otherwise,
Awesome.
floor is yours.
Well, my name is Natasha. I'm a stay-at-home mom currently. I used to be in psychology in college. I hope to eventually return to that, but for now, I'm probably just going to be going back into the workforce to get some money to go back to school. Gotta start over after, after separation and stuff. Newly single mom with 3 kids, it usually is just kind of starting over. And I mean, that's kind of part of the struggle as well, that I think most, divorced, or whether they were married or not, we weren't. When you're newly separated and you're quite reliant on your partner when you are a stay-at-home mom, then having to regain that independence can be extremely hard.
Yeah. Find your ground all over again,
absolutely.
Right?
And realizing, having such a gap on your resume from not working for so long can make it harder to get jobs as well. Not having all the bills in your name that affects your credit. All those kinds of things make a huge difference. So anyway, so for my experience, I would say with the separation itself has been a wonderful thing for me, now that I can go back and reflect on everything that happened in the relationship. But while I was in it, it was extremely confusing. There was definitely a lot of emotional, mental abuse, and I was pretty aware that that was going on, but not really to the level of where it was at.
That extent,
and then I wasn't fully aware until I started reaching out into the system. I had victim services contact me a couple of times, and they kind of clarified it for me further than I would have ever understood. That, there was actually physical and sexual abuse going on in the relationship as well. And while it might seem kind of funny, like, how would you not recognize those things? But it's because we so often go to the drastic things. We assume if somebody is sexually or physically abused, that also means that, they were hit, they were held down and forced to have sex, things like that, that's where people's minds go. And when you don't have that aspect, if you don't fully understand what classifies as abuse, you might not even really realize it's going on. And so in my own relationship, he wasn't hitting me, he wasn't, holding me down, things like that, but he would make himself really big, intimidate, like physically intimidate, without actually putting his hands necessarily on me. He would charge at me, he would block doorways, things like that. And so while those things were intimidating and scary, I didn't recognize that it was abuse. So things like that's kind of where, I would love for other people to get a further understanding in what all of the aspects are of abuse, so that they can really recognize like the dynamics of it in their own life. Or even if they are the person that is the abuser, like, oh, things aren't okay. So
this can be viewed as from this angle, and I didn't even realize it. It goes both ways,
absolutely.
Right?
And I have heard of people, one of my friends actually came out to me recently saying that he used to be a narcissist. And you don't hear that very often, where someone is a narcissist and they've realized it. But with sharing information like this, I feel like there might be more hope for that kind of stuff. And then in regards to like sexual abuse, like I said, like I wasn't held down and forced against my will, and so I didn't really feel like that was happening, but there wasn't a respect for my no. So when I was pregnant with my second son, for some reason that we never really could figure out what was going on, but I was experiencing a lot of pain when we'd have intercourse. And so naturally I didn't really want to. And then, it was a lot of guilt tactic. So I would get, well, I don't feel loved. I feel rejected. Can you just try? Like, just kind of constantly poking and prodding and guilting until eventually
Yeah.
I would just shut down and kind of just, okay, whatever, like, just let it happen type thing. And so, yeah, it took me 3.5 years to figure out that that was actually abuse and not okay.
Yeah.
And while I knew it was uncomfortable, absolutely, and that affected our relationship in so many more ways too, because I no longer really felt respected. I didn't feel like I could trust him. So then that played out more, and of course that would make me even less desiring to have intercourse with him. And then that would,
Yeah.
trigger even more rejection, and then that would trigger that cycle again. And I fully understand where it comes from him. I don't think it was any type of he was trying to hurt me, but he was so focused on his own feelings and desires of feeling rejected that he wasn't able to respect
Paying
how
attention.
I was
Yeah.
feeling and what my needs were.
Yeah.
And more or less that it wasn't okay when I say no, I say no. Like, end of story.
Yeah.
So,
So walk back through those. I think you said 3.5 years, together, and not necessarily like in detail, but you know where were you at, mentally and emotionally through all of that, and day by day, month by month, year by
yeah.
year, where did it start, and what did it like, kind of fester into, by the time you reached a breaking
Um,
point,
well,
so to speak.
I would say not that I recognize it all right away, but now looking back on it, the abuse started right from the beginning of the relationship. I won't say that he is a narcissist. I do believe there are some people in his family that might be. For
Might
for
be.
him, I don't think that he is a narcissist. He has some narcissistic tendencies. I would say that many of us have some to some degree. But I notice now that there was always the cycles of the love bombing, and so grandiose kind of expression, and I'll do better, and all these promises and giving you hope more or less than anything. And then eventually, it would get comfortable, that would phase off, and then there would be a lot of um, you know uh, remarks towards myself, belittling and things like that. And then if something went too far, where he said something that was just way across the line, then it would go back into the, oh, I'm sorry, I'll do better, like love bombing and, doing all the things
Yeah.
to show that they care. Um, so that stuff
Yeah.
started really early on, within probably the first month or two of us dating. But at that time, I didn't recognize it. And unfortunately, I know now
Yeah.
that I had been kind of used to those cycles in my life from other people. And so I didn't recognize that as an abnormal thing. I also,
Yeah. And probably didn't want to recognize it either, right? I mean, at the beginning of a relationship, like, you don't necessarily want to remove those blinders just yet. It's like, no, I just met this campy, like
yeah.
that,
Well,
right?
and with my work in psychology, and then I've also went through years of therapy myself. And between the two of them, I have recently recognized the desire to kind of relive those situations. So in a sense, I think that subconsciously I knew something was wrong right from the beginning, but it was reliving some stuff from my own past that more or less I was trying to go through that with the hopes of a better outcome. And so sometimes we
Yeah.
subconsciously can do that to try to
Interesting.
heal an old trauma, but we end up just re traumatizing ourselves instead.
Sure.
So I kind
Yeah.
of recognize that going on as well. Like I said, I didn't recognize it until more recently, but I'm glad that I have recognized that now so I can avoid
Sure.
it in the future. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, so I noticed that stuff going on. Well, I noticed now that all of that was starting very early in the relationship. Um, yeah, it kind of just continued on. I think we were in the relationship for maybe about 6 months before we ended up pregnant. And at that point, I actually almost left him because of how uncomfortable I was with what was going on sexually. And we were fighting so much that I was like, this isn't healthy. We
This
went
is,
to
yeah,
couples therapy, didn't really help a whole lot. We actually ended up breaking up in a therapy session and then went home and he convinced me to stay. So yeah, again, there was a lot of the, okay, like I know I've made mistakes and, like give me a
yeah,
chance. I'll go to my own personal therapy and I'll do better and all these things that didn't really happen. Um, yeah, and then when I was on maternity leave, he had lost his job. That's not his fault, but then there was a lot of, well, you need to get back to work. You need to make an income while I have a newborn baby at home, trying to finish some psychology studies. Like it didn't really make sense. There wasn't a balance
yeah,
there.
yeah. Doesn't sound like it at
Yeah.
all.
So, then there was a lot of stress and pressure between that kind of stuff as well. And then this is all just prior to COVID as well. So COVID hit and then life got even crazier.
Then
Also,
yeah,
because
right.
of that kind of blew everything under the rug because there was other pressing issues going on in life. And it was almost like, even if this isn't ideal or a happy relationship, like at this time it's like we need to all support each other as much as we can. And so it was just
Yeah,
kind of, we stuck together and like we were still fighting, but a lot of the stuff was kind of just brushed off to the side. So
yeah,
that kind of made things go on longer. And then when everything kind of calmed down surrounding COVID, things started to kind of go back to normal a little bit.
okay,
That's when I started being a lot more aware of really what was going on and being able to focus more on that. So we did go back to couples therapy again. We had some breakthroughs with that, but in the end, it still wasn't enough either. And, again, the relationship ended. Um, Sorry, we also did, after my second son was born, I was pregnant 6 months later with our youngest son. And so they're quite close in age as well. But with all of that,
yeah,
again, like it was just more reason almost to try to keep making the relationship work.
making it.
Even
Sure,
with all the
sure.
crazy stuff going on, it felt like, okay, like we've got a big family, like if we can make it work, that's better. Now I see, like, maybe not. If they're
Maybe
subjected
not.
to all
Yeah.
the fighting and stuff, that's not good for them either.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
right.
And so the turning point, I would say, for me, like we separated. Um and then, so how long were we separated? I think about 5 or 6 months. And then we ended up actually getting back together briefly. He came to the table and he actually heard me out when I talked to him about the sexual abuse. Um, it was really hard for him to kind of acknowledge. Um, he did seem to acknowledge it and apologize for it, and I felt with that I would be able to get past it, which maybe I would have, but then weeks later it came up again and he kind of went backwards on it, and I was like, okay, like well, that's not going to work. Like, you need to know what happened here so that I can trust that if you're aware of it, maybe you won't do
Yeah.
that again, kind of thing.
And came at it with like this newfound like knowledge that it wasn't just like, not just simply like this isn't good
Mhm.
behavior, but like like that's the title. Here's what that is described as. Like you had this newfound knowledge that you could kind of present it in a way that it wasn't just, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like nagging or saying like, like you're upset about something. Like it was very
Mhm.
specific,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Um, and yeah, so with that, like I kind of expected, that's why I ended up getting back into the relationship in the first place, was because I'm like, okay, he's taking ownership for this. He's
He heard this.
apologizing for it. It seems to have sunk in. Like if he understands it, then maybe he can focus on that, work on that, and that won't happen again.
Yeah.
But then when a couple weeks later he kind of went back on it, and then I was starting to see some micro um, behaviors that were kind of similar to that. So, he was definitely a lot
Yeah.
more cautious when it came to sexual intercourse, but he also was, like I would, on an evening that we're spending together, okay, like I would like us to just, watch a movie and cuddle or, whatever, like I don't want this to go any farther. Well, then eventually he would kind of push it that way anyways. And I'm like, okay, like you didn't hear that, or, that didn't.
You didn't really, you didn't process what I just said, did
Yeah,
you?
so, like it was starting to, not to the same level, but it was starting to kind of go that way again a little bit. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
something's not right here. And so we were only together again for 2 months. My mental health went so far down. So my mental health wasn't good in our relationship. And it was always blamed on postpartum, easy thing to blame it on. And yeah, it's very common, but that wasn't the problem.
Yeah.
Um, and then, once maybe it wasn't postpartum, then it was, well, maybe you have bipolar, or there are all these different things that he'd come up with that he would
Yeah.
prescribe that is probably wrong with me and not the situation.
Not looking
Yeah.
inward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my mental health wasn't good. Then when we separated for the 5 or 6 months, I wouldn't say that my mental health was, pristine, but it definitely was better. I was still feeling quite lost after so long of living like that.
Well, sure.
I didn't
Yeah.
know what I was doing with my life. I wasn't really ready to go back to work. I was just really confused. I was taking some time to do some things for
Yeah.
myself that made me happy. And so I was definitely getting a lot better in regards to that. But then when
Yeah.
we got back together, my mental health was worse than it had ever been. And that was kind of my turning point, because at the end of the year, it's actually New Year's Eve, I checked myself into the hospital because I was having some suicidal ideation. I wasn't acting on anything, but the thoughts were scary enough, especially being a mom of three. And I
Yeah.
personally also have a mom that has been suicidal. Not that she has ever acted on it that I'm aware of, but I actually had to put her into a psych ward at one point, to address her mental state. And she has been kind of up and down since then, forever.
Ever
And
since.
so,
Yeah.
like this is something that I've dealt with as an adult, but I was like, I don't want to keep brushing this under the rug. If I'm having these thoughts, even if I don't feel like I would act on them, I need to address this, because I don't want my
Yeah.
kids to be raised like that.
I was gonna say,
Like I
yeah.
don't know when this
It's a
started.
whole new
Yeah, I don't
perspective.
know when that started for my mom. It could have been earlier and I didn't really know of it, but maybe it didn't start until later. And had it started younger, maybe
Yeah.
I would have, been more exposed to that kind of stuff. And I just didn't want that for my kids. And also, on top of that, I want my
Yeah.
kids to have a mom that's well. So I went into the hospital to see, like, if there's some kind of imbalance, then maybe, as much as I don't like medication, maybe I need to consider it. I talked to victim services, I talked to a crisis worker, I talked to a doctor. I was in there for like 9.5 hours. They never did admit me into the psych ward. I was just in the emergency area. And they, after assessing me, they were like, we don't really feel like you need to be here. You can stay. We can admit you if you want to be admitted. But, we feel that it's safe for you to go home as long as you feel safe to go home. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, more or less, it was just a check in and make sure everything's okay. And yeah, they said it was fine. It's just more or less circumstantial. So, and while
Yeah.
they can't say, hey, you need to leave a relationship, like there was, the subtle,
They can point things out,
there was
though.
the
Yeah.
subtle, okay, well, this relationship is impacting you and you need to make a choice based on that. So, it was pretty clear that, I knew what I needed to do. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, anyways, fun New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
And
Hey.
then I left and grabbed some McDonald's and went home and watched a movie.
Hey.
So, anyways, that was my turning point, though, because after that, like, I had ended the relationship. I and I just started focusing on myself. Unfortunately, where it hit even harder is that the father of my children also tried to take the kids from me because of my mental health. So, that was kind of like, that just felt like rock bottom to me. Like, you already
Just
feel
adds to
so
it. Yeah.
low that you were at the point of even having these ideations, and have your kids
Yeah.
taken away too. It was like, oh, wow, like nothing worse could happen right now. Like, not that nothing worse
Yeah.
really could happen, but that's how it feels. And so
Yeah.
I had so much motivation to, do better and get better. And so I went to weekly therapy with my main therapist. And then I had another therapist that I saw a few times as well. Um, and yeah, just kind of really working on it as much as I can, checking in with my doctor as much as I could, doing a lot of work at home, and you know filling my cup with more positives. So I keep seeing this video of people that are showing a glass of water where they put dirt in it, and instead of focusing on trying to scoop out all of the dirt, because you're also scooping out all of the water as well, leaving nothing left in there, they show to just pour
Yeah.
more clean water in it, and eventually all of that dirt will just come out and you'll have clear water.
Comes out.
And so the point of that is
I love
to
that.
pour more good into the cup. And so I started
Yeah.
focusing on that. So, I started focusing
That,
on, I joined a sports team. So not only was that good for my physical health, but it also got me socializing and,
sure. Yeah.
meeting new people and trying new things. And I also, it's so much different than getting a gym membership, because you go when you want to, and I don't feel like it today. And when you're on a team, it's like, well, we have practice today, so you better.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really good for me. Getting back into art, hiking a lot. So just doing lots of things that made me happy, and really starting to get
Yeah.
out and actually meet new people, because I hadn't for years. I had been
Yeah. No, I was gonna say. Yeah.
so yeah, and anyone that I socialized with, other than like my direct family, was his people. And after separating too, like, well, now they're not my people. And
They're not.
so
You're right.
I was pretty isolated in the relationship, and then I was almost more isolated when the relationship ended.
Yeah.
So just really focusing on what I could control, and yeah, focusing on what's good. I also started doing this thing, focusing on what you can be thankful for, or not even thankful, I'm sorry, lucky. What makes you feel lucky? And rather than like, oh, well, I won the lottery today kind of luck, like, oh, I went to the grocery store and I ran into an old friend today. Well, that was lucky. Things like that that you can focus
Yeah.
on that are
Yeah.
smaller.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
just a total mind shift and change of lifestyle. And yeah, like I don't feel depressed at all anymore. I don't have to take medication for it. I just changed my lifestyle. Not to say
Yeah.
that I'm happy 24/7. That's not possible.
But who is
But
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm way better than I have been in years.
Yeah. And all those things, that you're doing, moving forward here, do they help you not, have the thoughts or even come close to having the idea of going back to him and starting? Because you mentioned several times of like, feeling like you were okay, or like, you didn't see it, so you like, you just kind of kept going with it, and then eventually, wait a minute, this was a bad idea, like, or is there something else that kind of stops you now altogether of saying no, that like there's no part of that, this is healthy, for me, for our children, for life, like moving forward, how, what helps you navigate that, I guess the best way to put
Um,
it.
I would say there's multiple aspects to that. Recognizing that we tried multiple times and that didn't go over well. Um, I don't see a whole lot of reason to try again, I suppose. Like, how many times are you gonna go through that?
How many tries? Yeah.
I don't want to risk my mental health going that low again. And
Yeah.
so I would rather not even attempt that again. But even more
Sure.
so, my kids, like, it's so confusing for them, for us to separate, get back together, separate. Like, it's too much. So I think it's just easier to have a clean slate and keep it as it is and move forward rather than, put them
Yeah.
through that again. Even if there is a chance that it could be good, well, you know what? Like we had that chance a couple of times. We had enough time. We went through therapy together. We went to our own individual therapy. It didn't work. So, and not to say that there's definitely a lot of inner work that I had to and will continue to have to do. But I recognize that there's a lot of work that he would need to do for us to work as well. And I can't rely on what
Yeah.
could be in a relationship, right? Like I'm at a loss for words right now. Uh, like when you're hoping that things can be a certain
Yeah.
way, rather than focusing on
Can't.
what is right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Um, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing the story.